And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Deborah Kobylt Live. I'm your host, Deborah Zara Kobylt. And joining me today is Aidan Reilly, one of the co-founders of Farmlink Project. Thrilled to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Gosh, this is something that should have been done a long time ago. And your entire story on why you did it, when you did it, is quite fascinating. So why don't you start by telling us what is Farmlink Project and when did you start? When did you start it?
Totally. So Farmlink Project is a student-run nonprofit. We work here in the United States, and what we do is we work with farms that have surplus produce that they're going to throw out or send to the landfill, and instead we get it to food banks that need it across the U.S. So we began this in April of 2020. Myself and a couple friends in Los Angeles, we basically just read articles that I'm sure many of the viewers saw themselves about farmers being forced to dump like mountains of potatoes or millions of eggs. And we thought that was crazy, but especially because, we saw a local food bank that we grew up volunteering at that basically it told us they were running out of food. They'd gone from 300 families a week to 1,300 families a week. So,
Wow.
but yeah, when you see those two issues back to back, you're like, those are two problems that can sound like they can solve each other. Millions of pounds of food going to waste, good food, just because no one can take it, and crazy spiking numbers of Americans who are going hungry and can't get the food.
Right. And this is obviously during a time of the pandemic where even if you could maybe get food, the shelves were empty.
Yeah.
Insane. Let's face it, it was a logistical nightmare. But go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like what we were seeing outside food banks, and this is coming from someone who grew up volunteering at food banks, but never had to depend on them or really understand the situation of what it means to be food insecure, which basically means you don't know where your next meal is going to come from 3 to 4 days from now. What you're seeing is people standing outside in lines that are 2, 3 hours long to get a bag of groceries. And, sometimes even if they could get food, it wasn't the right food. It wasn't healthy food. So what we started to do was just call, we didn't know anything about trucking or farms or logistics. We just started calling farmers and asking them like, why are you throwing out all this food? What can we do to help? And the big answer was, we want to get it to people who need it. We just need like help getting it off our farm and transportation. We don't have time to figure out how to get this to a food bank. So that's what
Wow.
we started doing. In the beginning, we were renting U-Hauls and driving to the farms ourselves, picking up like our first load was 13,000 eggs, and then driving it back on the 405 freeway to food banks that needed it. First couple of weeks we were doing it ourselves. Thankfully, we don't drive the trucks anymore because I don't even know if that was legal, but it was like a proof of concept that it worked. And really what was needed most was just people going and helping farmers who had too much, didn't have enough time on their hands to figure out where to put the food that they worked hard to grow.
There's a lot to talk about there. I'm going to just start with this. I like how you said a food bank that you grew up volunteering at, right? You're on the west side of Los Angeles. That food bank was in Santa Monica, I believe.
Yep.
But how important is it if families or schools bring their kids, even once? It does have an impact. A lot of times I think, kids will go visit. What's the point? It's a big point because it does stick in your head, right? Did you volunteer a lot as a kid?
Yeah, I would go volunteer, let's say during the holiday seasons and those sort of standard times that people will bring their kids or their families out to go help out. But I also went to a high school that was really, really encouraged uh, uh, giving back and basically being selfless and spending your time for the benefit of others. So during my high school years, I had experiences like working at a homeless shelter uh, for a month at a time as a cook and things like that that got me exposure. But I would say that even going into college, it wasn't that then I came into my early 20s with this mindset of, oh, I have to work in a nonprofit or I have to work in the service industry. I didn't at all. I had completely different career plans. It was really just a right time, right moment, right time sort of situation.
Right.
We're in this disaster scenario in the United States that we're still hardly coming out of. And
No, it's true.
and sort of understanding, like, very rarely can you kind of look at a moment in time and be like, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. And how do I want to remember how I played a role in doing something about it. And I think that's something that motivated a lot of us in the beginning, was like, if you have the privilege to be basically sitting at your house right now and not being forced to go work a job, how can you help the people who are having to work those jobs or having to go to food banks and things like that?
That's everything, and I'm going to cut that out as a little clip and play it all over, because that's really important. Because sometimes we're all just sitting there and we're like, oh my God, this is awful, what am I supposed to do? But you sort of stepped out of that just for a moment and you said, well, I guess I'll just do something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just sort of a perfect moment where you saw a need with wasted food, and you saw people who needed that food, and you just got up off your butt, called some friends, and did something about it. I love that, Aidan. I love it. Talk about a little bit the waste, can we? I don't think people realize about farming waste. I almost want to take it back and peel it back a little bit. Is it wasted because they pick it and maybe the vegetables aren't wanted because it has a mark on it, or they're still, they were never picked at all? Like, tell us a little bit about all this food. And from what I understand, 50 million pounds, right, of food is what you've moved since you started doing this in April of 2020. Is that right?
Yeah. So we've rescued 50 million pounds of produce since we started in April of 2020.
Wow.
And, I think that's something we're proud of, but like, listen to how much food is wasted every year at the farm level. We're talking 20 billion pounds a year. And so that's like a number that's impossible to envision. Like, I have no idea what 20 billion pounds means or what that looks like. The thing is, though, is just, I know that, just speaking for myself, my idea of food waste before I got into this project and into this space was like, if you didn't finish your meal at dinner and you threw out like your, half your chicken Parmesan or whatever, or if, at the restaurant level, what they would throw out that wasn't sold at that day. And those are legitimate aspects of this. But there's this crazy thing going on in the United States right now where at the farm level, farmers are being pressed to stock grocery store shelves with perfectly aesthetic produce year round. No matter if you're in Maine or Texas, you want to be able to go get a mango that is perfectly ripe. And what that's leading to is farmers who are having to overgrow what they're expecting to sell. So if I were a farmer and I'm trying to sell, you are trying to buy 1,000 bushels of broccoli from me, I'm going to grow 1,200 bushels, because there's things you can't predict, like weather patterns that make the broccoli smaller or bigger than you're going to want. And what happens then is, once I sell that to you, once the farmer sells what they've promised, there's this extra amount left over that they don't necessarily know what to do with. And maybe it's blemished, and maybe sometimes it's too ripe even, which leads to, on like the larger scale, literally billions of pounds of produce and perishables every year. And farmers are too busy to be able to, sit around and figure out where to put that extra stuff. They might go try to sell it at a wholesale market. But once the next day rolls around, they're on to the next thing. These are some of the hardest working people in the US. So that's where Farmlink comes in. We come in and we say, you just need to tell us what you have and where it is and how it's packaged, and we're going to figure out who can take it.
What do they usually do with it? I mean, it goes to what? A landfill? And let's talk about what that does to the environment too.
Yeah. So I have to clarify that farmers don't, we work with over 100 farms in the US, and basically every single one that we've developed a relationship to, they've expressed to us the same thing, which is that they really don't like throwing out their food. I mean, they've been working and putting investment into growing this food. So when it gets to the point where they have to send something to a landfill, they're not happy about it, but it's sort of a last resort after they've gone and tried to take it to a wholesale market where, let's say, people could buy it in bulk to make juices, like companies could buy it for that purpose, or sort of getting into that secondary market. But should it not sell there, they have to send to a landfill, and they have to pay to send it to a landfill. So they're losing money on an already sunk cost. And if you can envision like the scale of this, we're talking truckloads the size of, stacked end to end, like the length of a football field, full of like perfectly good kale, for example, that are just sent to landfill and then dumped. And we don't see that living in, I live in Los Angeles. You don't see that living in the cities, but it's very real. It happens every single day.
What does that do to the carbon emissions, though? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a huge aspect of this. Kind of the line I use to contextualize how this plays a role in environmental degradation is the fact that if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions behind the US and China. It plays a massive role because when you go send a load, 40,000 pounds of a vegetable, and you put it in the landfill, it decomposes improperly, which releases more than CO2, is releasing tons of methane into the atmosphere, leading to just like billions of pounds of these greenhouse gas emissions going to the US. And while our emissions are a complicated issue, I see that as one of the most fixable causes of climate change, because this is food that can be used, should be used, and there are places that need it and millions of people who need it. So every truck that we, divert from the landfill, we're also diverting significant amounts of harmful greenhouse gas emissions, which is a big part of what we do.
Does the government, sometimes I believe they do, pay farmers to not grow food, knowing that there's going to be a surplus?
It's a complicated economic system, and like I know what I do know is that like we'll see areas where there's a surplus, let's say up in the Northwest United States, where we're just seeing an overflow of something like onions or potatoes that they're growing up in Washington and Idaho. And yes, there will be government action to try to step in and curb that. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's too little, too late. And we can see food banks or community centers or secondary markets like that can use potato scraps or whatever, taking those in. But in those areas, they're just overflowed with these, while as, 2 states under them, a food bank might not be getting any potatoes. So it's an imbalance more than anything. It's not about not enough food. It's an imbalance and like a breakdown in logistics, basically.
Do you know, I know what you rescue, right? Because you said about 50 million pounds of unused food, which is stunning to me. You're right. It's such a big number. I don't even know how to quantify that, right? I don't even know what that would look like. But how much food is actually wasted in total? Do you know? In the US?
Close to 100 billion pounds a year. So we're getting into the territory of numbers that don't make any sense to our brains, but that's the reality. It's 100 billion pounds. And, we also just look at it in the fact that we do grow enough food in the United States to feed every person, not just in the US, but in the world twice over. So, just look at that fact and just be like, okay, then how come 40% of Americans don't know where they can get, their next meal?
But it all works together, in fact, because you're right. If 40% of Americans don't know where they're getting their next meal, and you're really trying to help fix that, gosh, I'm sure that you've had your eye over there to say, well, once we can sort of get this under control, let's face it, it's a big, big job. I wonder, can we help with the starvation going on around the world? Do you think that way too?
Yeah, we do. And we've even kind of, not even kind of, we've experimented and launched sort of like incubator projects, basically, to see how we can play a role in these other countries. So we've moved a couple 100,000 pounds of food in Mexico with a Farmlink Mexico team. And we've also done the same in Canada, where we've moved a couple loads up there. And our sort of philosophy behind that is we do know that in a lot of, especially like in South America, with a ton of these agricultural states that are facing high levels of food insecurity, they can do the same thing on an even larger scale. But we just want to make sure that if we're playing a role in that, we want to empower people there to do it and set up their own system. Because I don't believe in, I can't sit here in California and guess what is needed in Mexico or Brazil. So I think I see Farmlink's role in the international scale to be something that incubates and supports branches of our project, but that are very hyper local to wherever it is set up.
What did you study in school, and how do you do the logistics? Because I think I said earlier, I can barely figure out how to pick up my kids from school, right? This is
Yeah.
a big logistical project. How do you do it? How did you do it?
Yeah. I'm pretty thankful that we set this system up at a very uh, on-demand basis, meaning we didn't come in and try to design this big process and then implement it, because I think it would have been a disaster if we did that. If we tried to predict all the little intricacies that would pop up, you know, myself, like I can't even keep track of like where I put my car keys. So there's no way that we would have been able to just design this perfect system. So what we did is we knew we had to call farmers, obviously, and make relationships with them. And we knew we had to do the same with food banks so that we could know exactly where to send food once we had it. So we created a farms team and we created a food bank team, food insecurity team. And in between, then we have our deals team, which is people who are basically the link between the two. And they're the ones like the mail runners going back and forth and saying, you know, farmers got this and here are the details. We're going to package it and send the truck. And these are student volunteer teams who are on the phone with farmers and food banks every day and trucking carriers. And it's a pretty great system that we haven't changed since, you know, spring of 2020, where it's totally based on personal relationships and very human decision-making behind where we're sending the food once we know we have it. And it's done on like an overnight to 2-day basis. We don't hold on to the food.
Wow.
Once it goes straight from the farm to the food bank. No in between.
Nationwide, you've got, let me see, you told me you have 100 farms that you work with and 200 food banks, right?
Yeah, just about.
Which is a lot. And are all of your people that are there at the Farmlink Project, are they all volunteer, or some of them, or some of you paid? I mean, that's a lot. Again, to manage that is a lot.
Yeah, we for the majority of this project, it has been all volunteer. But then we kind of realized, wow, you know, this is something that has existed a lot longer before the pandemic, and will exist for much longer after. Like, this is something we want to commit ourselves to, and can maybe really make an impact in the future doing so. So let's make it a real organization. Let's hire a staff. Let's get the back end solid, and let's grow this so that we can have an impact in like the billions of pounds. So we did start hiring staff and getting people on full time. And one of the things we're like exploring now is how do we maintain our identity, which is one of young people who believe in that they can affect change, coming in and volunteering their time to do so. So we're kind of in the stages right now of crafting and launching this Farmlink Fellowship, which is for anyone from a senior in high school to a recent grad who wants to basically lead a team. And, you know, they're not making coffee. They're like booking trucks. They're fundraising. They're doing marketing, really hands-on stuff, who want to join that fellowship and commit that time. And then a job opportunity can come out of that. But really, it's sort of like a Teach for America kind of model, where you're going to learn a lot really quickly and you're going to be better for it. And so will thousands of other people that you help.
Wow. Have you ever visited some of the food banks? I'm sure you have, that the food goes to, and talk to some of the recipients there?
Yeah, I try to go every Friday to one of the food banks that we work with. We also, you know, even this coming Saturday, we have a delivery happening at one of our partners, United Hands in Compton, here in Los Angeles. So even though Farmlink is basically a virtual organization, we're totally decentralized, spread out, not just in the US, but volunteers and members from all sorts of countries. Every time we can get our members at one of our deliveries, or at any delivery where help is needed, it's super important, and we make a big push for it. And we all try to be there, because it's pretty easy to sit behind your computer screen and like crunch numbers and talk about millions of pounds and things like that. But it's way different. It's way more contextualized if you can go and actually talk to people who are depending on this, and talk to people who have been running a food bank for like since before I was born. You know, those are the kind of people that you need to connect with if you're going to do a good job here.
Yeah, I mean, well, it really puts a face to the people that you're helping, and that is everything. I'm sure when you show up and you see, the recipients, it must make you feel like, gosh, I'm glad we've done this, and we've got a lot more work to do because there's so much need. There's more now than ever, right? Since even pre-pandemic, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic is continuing to spike this issue, and people are not getting, like I said, they're not just not getting enough, but they're not getting the right food. And there's people who are going and depending on their local food bank, and not the fault of the food bank, it's what they're receiving in donations, but the families are going home with packaged cookies and chips and things like that, which at the end of the day, it's what you can get on your table that matters. But that's why we were pretty passionate about playing a role and only working with from the farm dairy, milk, and eggs, and produce, healthy vegetables and fruits.
Do you have any partners? Who are some of them that you work with?
Yeah, we've worked with all, it's been incredible, the kind of companies that have reached out to us to help. We've worked, our biggest partner is Chipotle, the Mexican grill. We sent an email to them, in like the summer of 2020. We didn't really expect a response back, but they got back to us and they were like, we're interested. How can we help? And since then we've launched like all sorts of projects with them.
Okay. This is good to know. And next time that I order from Chipotle, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. That they're doing I mean that, because you never know, right? With these large corporations, you're like, oh, please, do they even care about people? So my answer there is yes. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
They walk the walk. They don't just talk.
Yeah.
They don't just talk the talk. And perfect timing. I mean, if you go to Chipotle right now, there's a couple of things you can do that are a great example of how we work together. Like if you were to order Chipotle online right now, we have a thing that's going where you can name your order, give 10. And then Chipotle, for every order that's named give 10, will donate 10 pounds of produce through the Farmlink Project. And so we've already had a couple thousand of those come through since we launched it on Monday. That's going to be a huge impact. And you can also, between now and January 10th, it gives you a little option to round up your order, and that difference goes to Farmlink. So what they're really good at, and why we like working with them so much, is because they're good at imagining ways that people can help with what they have, where you can kind of enable millions of people to give small amounts here and there that adds up to like a really big impact. Sorry for my slack noise.
That's a big one. Remember that, everybody. A small amount, like a little small amount, can add up to quite a bit. Who else other than Chipotle?
Well, we've worked on projects with World Wildlife Fund and Kroger and IDEO, and then we those are our biggest partners. Refed is a huge partner that we have in the food waste space. If you haven't heard of them, they're like the central node if you work in food space. They bring together all the partners, all the funders, to make sure we're on the same page about what's the best thing to do here. And the KKR has been a big supporter of our project, but then beyond that, we've kind of always relied on individual donations. We started this in a very grassroots way, just on social media, pushing it out. Like I learned how to make, we learned how to make a website. We learned how to collect donations. And then we just asked friends and family to give us $5 here or there. And that's still what we depend on, is like thousands of individual donations from people who care enough to pledge like $10 a month or whatever it is. And it makes a difference, $10 to us, we can move 240 pounds of food with that.
Wow. $10, you can move 240 pounds of food from the farm to a food bank. I think this is amazing. And before I let you go, shout out to your website. That would be what? Tell us.
Farmlinkproject.org.
Yeah, remember the .org, people, because you might see another Farmlink project. That's not his. That's not there. So this one is farmlinkproject.org.
Yep.
Anything else you want to tell my audience? Because we have a pretty engaged audience, and I really want to make sure that that we do something for you, for all that you're doing out there.
Well, That's amazing. And I would just say that we have a million different ways that you can help. It's not limited to just giving. You can sign up and be a part of like a newsletter that we send out that has weekly updates on what we're doing and how you can get involved. You can donate your time yourself, or you can come in and help us call farmers. Tons of opportunities like that. And I would just say, reach out to me, or, personally, I would love to talk to any one of you who would like to get involved. My email is aidan.reilly@farmlinkproject.org. That's Aidan with an A. And we can take all the help we can get, and any small amount counts. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I just think it's tremendous what you're doing. I guess you're doing this full time, right? This is a full-time undertaking for you at this point, right? Did you study this to do this sort of a thing, or it just sort of came to you during the pandemic?
Yeah, I never answered your question about what I studied. I studied political science, so international politics. And, that doesn't exactly have the most obvious link towards food system, but it did kind of teach me about.
It does.
It's about history and crises across the world. And, it was what I was interested in. I'm interested in storytelling. And I think the earliest people that we had come into this thing were storytellers. I used to do documentary filmmaking. So did the other co-founder, James. And, the very first thing we did is we didn't know how to really, we didn't know anything about farms, but we knew how to work a camera and, make something that would connect with people such that they wanted to help. So that played a huge role.
Yeah, and you keep connecting. I think this is fantastic. So everybody, please reach out to Aidan Reilly at farmlinkproject.org. I'm sure, I know you shouted out your email, but if not, I'm sure it's on the website. And if not, we'll put it out also on our social media. So doesn't matter, even though this is something that was definitely pushed out by, a lot of young people who want to get involved for their own future, right? Carbon emissions are everything, what we're putting out there. Learn more about that. Volunteer, pick up a phone. And you don't have to be like college age and post-college age to do it, because I'm interested in doing something like this too. So I hope some of my friends, everybody, it's for everybody, because it benefits all of us. So thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that you took the time to come on our show today. And you could, it's great. And you could find us, everybody. Deborah Kobylt Live is sort of everywhere. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. We put our show out on IGTV. And then in terms of our audio platforms, you can find us anywhere from iHeart to Amazon to Spotify. So just about, or Apple, anywhere you get your podcast, you'll find Deborah Kobylt Live. Please look up farmlinkproject.org and Aidan Reilly. Thanks for taking the time. Great work. Amazing. And have an amazing holiday.
All right. You too.
Okay. Bye, everybody. And thanks for joining us. See you next time. Bye-bye.